Right, so I would assume that you are seeing my screen. Right, so let me know if you can't see my PowerPoints about Galaxy. So I'm in the very first slide. Right, now up to now what we have been learning is about stars, which are actually a bit familiar for us, because if you go outside and look at the sky, what you would see is either planets, meteors, or stars, right? Now one question is, can we see a galaxy if we go outside and look at the sky? The answer is, of course, yes. You will see our own Milky Way on the sky at some point in the night. Now, how you will see the Milky Way is a different question. I guess all of you may know roughly that Milky Way is a galaxy that has a spiral shape. But if you look at the sky and try to see the Milky Way, you will not see any kind of spiral arms. The reason is very simple. We are inside our own galaxy and looking at our galaxy, which means we are inside, so that we will not get the complete shape, or we will not see the complete shape of the galaxy. But we will instead, what we will see is just a band of stars that goes through this like a line on the sky, which is just like a section of the Milky Way. So that's what we would see on the sky. Now in this lecture, we will basically talk about galaxies and galaxy clusters. Right. Now, what we know up to now is Milky Way is our own galaxy. So that is the name given for our galaxy. And so what we will learn in this lecture is we will learn about how astronomers have discovered other galaxies, and then how our galaxy looks like, and probably some dimensions of our galaxy, and some ancient work that has done to some ancient findings about the galaxies, how people found these, discovered these other galaxies outside the Milky Way, those kind of stuff. Right. Now, observation of our night sky gives impression that the stars and the nebula may be all be associated with one another. Is this really true? Now, this word nebula is a word that used by ancient astronomers to identify galaxies, because at this time, which is like probably hundreds of years ago, people, astronomers or any other observers did not know about there are other galaxies in the universe. So they have used this word like nebula, and you probably know that we have talked nebulas before as well, which are just these gas clouds. Now, if you look at the night sky as I explained to you before, you will see this pattern of grouping of stars in the sky, and this pattern is very much pretty much apparent to the naked eye. But if you look at this from a town which consists with a lot of lights, you wouldn't see this. But if you look from a place where you don't see much street lights, at night you will clearly see that there is a band of stars that going through the sky, which is what we called as the Milky Way. And of course, you can observe it from your naked eye, but when Galileo and others also observed using a telescope, they found more fainter stars there, right? So that's obvious. Now, if you have a good telescope, you will should be able to see more and more faint stars. Now, early on, it was a common belief that this Milky Way group was the universe itself. Now, the people did not know that there are other galaxies in the universe. So, what they assumed that this Milky Way is the universe, right? So that was the assumption. So they thought that we only have the Milky Way and it is the universe itself. Now we know that it is not the case, but this is how people thought probably thousands of years ago. And this picture probably should be familiar with anyone who probably have seen the night sky from a dark village or city. This is the band of, let me, so this is the band that you would see as the Milky Way, right, in the night sky. But how clear that you see this will depend on the conditions of the sky and conditions of the light or the amount of light pollution that you have in that particular location. And here is another picture that is taken of the Milky Way. Right, so that's a very brief introduction about how we see the Milky Way. And early 1700s, there was some speculation that there may be many more stars beyond the confines of the Milky Way itself. Now, it is this era around 1700 that people had the thought that there may be other stars beyond the Milky Way itself. And you can just think about 300 years ago, we did not have any kind of technology as we have right now. So what people thought was there may be some stars beyond the Milky Way itself. And this person right is here, Immanuel Kant was the first one to propose this theory. And observations with better telescopes identified spiral nebula, which were thought to be possible collections of distant stars that were comparable to the Milky Way. So using a telescope, they have identified that there was a spiral nebula. And remember, once again, this name right here, you will soon realize this, what this nebula means, a galaxy, right? But at this time, 300 years ago, nobody knew about a galaxy outside the Milky Way. So that's why they had this different name at that time. So what they have observed is a spiral shaped nebula. So they have probably have seen some spiral arms, and so they thought that there may be a possible collections of distant stars that were comparable to the Milky Way. So this is the place that they identified that there may be a nebula which is a collection of stars that may be outside the Milky Way. But they were actually not sure at that time about this thing. And right. Now in 1920, so this is a small story that has that I am telling to you about how they have found that there are galaxies outside the Milky Way. In 1920, there was a famous debate, very famous debate that took place between two very well-known astronomers. So one astronomer is called Shapley, and the other one is called Kurtz. So they were very famous astronomers, and they had an argument that Shapley argued that these nebula were in our galaxy. So their argument was basically about this point right here, the spiral nebula that they have seen. So one actually argued, okay, this nebula also should be inside our galaxy. But Kurtz argued that these nebulas were very distant, which means they are not in our galaxy. This is a different nebula, right? But this argument went on The reason is there was no one that has measured their distances, because once you look at the sky, you can see stars now everywhere. So there are collections of stars that seems like a spiral shape, and sharply argued that these should be in our galaxy, but Courtesy argued that this should be very distant galaxy. But although this argument went on, nobody had measured their distances because they are so far away, and the technology that they had was enough to make the parallax angle measurements, but they are not accurate when you go outside the galaxy, right? Because once the parallax angle becomes smaller, you can't, it is very hard to measure those distances. That's what has happened, right? After some time, astronomers found a new method to find the distances to these far away stars. So that's came from something called Cepheid variable stars. Remember, this name is very important, that you have to remember this, one of the very important findings in the history of astronomy. Thankfully, a new method of measuring distances had recently been discovered. This involves Cepheid stars. Now, what Cepheid stars means, this is a kind of variable star, as you see from the name. Cepheid stars vary regularly in brightness as they pulsate, and their periods of variation range from 1 to 50 days. Now, this is the characteristic of the Cepheid stars. They actually vary their brightness very regularly when they pulsate, and this variation of brightness has a period that range from 1 to 50 days, right? So this is the important thing about variable, the Cepheid variable stars, right? Now, once you have these Cepheid variable stars, in 1908, astronomers, there was one astronomer with this name, Henrietta, measured the period and the luminosity of large number of Cepheid stars. So what she did was, she found these Cepheid variable stars, observed these Cepheid variable stars, and then she measured the period and the luminosity of a large sample of Cepheid stars. Now, to measure the luminosity, she also had to estimate the distance to these stars, right? You probably know that the luminosity and the distance are two things that are related. And the most important thing here is actually she found or discovered a relationship, or we call this as a correlation between the period of a Cepheid star and its average luminosity. And this is called period luminosity relationship. And this is one of the very important findings in the history of astronomy, to identify that there are other galaxies outside the Milky Way. Now, what this relationship tells us is the most luminous Cepheid stars have the longest periods, and this will probably, this may be very clear for you if I show this graph to you. And this is the graph. This is what she found. Now, right here on the top right hand corner, so I have shown you a typical light curve of a Cepheid variable, right? And you can see it increase the brightness and decrease and increase and decrease again like that. And on the y-axis, you have the magnitudes. So it's basically when you go up, you can see the numbers are going smaller and smaller. So what that means is, when you go up in the y-axis, the brightness increases. So what has happened was, brightness is minimum right here, and then it has increased and then decreased and then again increased like that. So it goes on. and you can you can clearly see that there is a period for this particular curve. Now, what this astronomer did was she actually measured the period for a large number of Cepheid variables and also their luminosity and make this graph. And you can see we have a very nice linear or very close to linear shaped graph. So what the graph tells us is when the period increases, the luminosity also increases. For example, if you take this particular star, the period is less than 2 days and its luminosity is right here. And if you take this star right here, the period is larger, close to 50 days, and the luminosity is around 10 to the power 4. It's in fact more than 10 to the power 4. Now this is what the period luminosity relation tells you. Now the advantage of having this is, and also make sure that you keep this equation in mind when I go for the next slide. So this basically explains, this slide basically explains you the relation between, once you know the luminosity, you can find the absolute magnitude, right, of the luminosity. So what all you need to do is, if you find a new Cepheid variable from in the sky, you can find the period of that. So all you need to do is just measure the variness, the brightness with the time, so that you will get a curve like this. So once you have this curve, you can find the period, and then what you need to do is look at that period from this graph. Let's say your new star has a period of 10 days, then you can directly go to this graph right here, look at 10 days and go up right here. Okay, so the location is right here on the graph, and then you can estimate the luminosity of that particular star. So once you know the luminosity, all you need to do is plug that luminosity right here in this equation, and then you have the luminosity, and the luminosity is sun. You already know about that, so that you can compare these two values. And once you plug, once you plug the luminosity of that particular star, you can find the magnitude, absolute magnitude. Now, once you know the absolute magnitude and the apparent magnitude, you can use that previous equation that I asked you to remember for an exam. I remember that I mentioned about that at the beginning of the lecture. You just plug the apparent magnitudes and the absolute magnitudes for that equation, so that you will get the distance to that particular star. So this is the method that one can use to determine the distances to these stars. Now the advantage of this for galaxies is that once you find the distances to these stars, you can decide whether these star belongs to our own Milky Way or it's in a different distance range which is outside the Milky Way. And this diagram basically explains you very basic steps that how to use Cepheid to measure the distances. Part A is find the Cepheid variable star and measure its period. So this is what this lady is doing. And then is there anybody have any questions? Okay. So then the second step will be use the period luminosity relation to calculate the star's luminosity. So that can be done using this graph right here. So if you know the period, you can estimate the luminosity. Once you know the luminosity, measure the star's apparent brightness also, which gives you the apparent magnitude. And then compare the luminosity with the apparent brightness to calculate the distance, right? So those are the 4 basic steps to find the distance to a star. Right. Now remember that up to now we have learned several different methods to find the distances. The number 1 is using the parallax angle method. Once you know the parallax angle, you can directly use D equal 1 over P equation and find the distance. But in that way, you can only find distances to nearby stars. But when the stars are far away, the parallax angle becomes very small, so that it is not possible to measure the angle accurately. So this is why that particular method is not useful when you need to find the distances to a galaxy or a star that is outside our Milky Way, right? Then you need to use something like these Cepheid stars and the period luminosity relation. And remember that apart from these two methods, I have mentioned that even though I didn't show you how to find it, if you have this type uh, one type of supernova, you can use that to find the distances to objects that are very far away, right? Remember that these are mentioned at different locations at different times, but make sure that you understand these different ways of measuring distances, right? Now, this slide basically explains you how to find the distances uh, using Cepheid variable stars. Now, knowing the period luminosity relationship, it is possible to use Cepheids to measure the distances in astronomy. Suppose one wishes to measure the distance to the Andromeda galaxy. Now, I have mentioned another example here, which is actually what you need to resolve that debate between two astronomers. Now, let's assume that you need to measure the distance to the Andromeda galaxy. So, what you need to do first is you must first locate or identify some Cepheid stars in this nebula, right? Of course, this is a galaxy now. And then Cepheids can be identified by their periods of variation. Now, if the star has a period, then you can identify that as a Cepheid star. Then you use the period luminosity relation to estimate the absolute magnitude of each star. And then average apparent magnitude of each Cepheid can be also measured. Our average apparent magnitude can be easily measured because you just take the brightness as you see it, right? Just the apparent magnitude. So once you know the absolute and apparent magnitudes, you just use this equation to find the distance. So that's all, right? That is how you practically use the Cepheid stars to measure distances. Remember that there are several relations that we have been learning up to now. The one that we have learned in the last lecture is the mass luminosity relation, right? Remember that M is roughly equal to luminosity to the power 3.904. So that the equation we learned last time, that's mass luminosity relation. Now this one that we are talking here is called period luminosity relation, right? Now let's see how this finding about the Cepheid variables resolve the problem about that they have about that debate, basically, right? So there is you probably know about this astronomer. This is he is a famous American astronomer called Edwin Hubble, and all of you probably have heard about Hubble law, right? Which will come at the end of this lecture as well. So Edwin Hubble took on the challenge of resolving this debate. Now, Edwin Hubble decided to resolve the debate by trying to measure the distance to the Andromeda Nebula. So, now nobody knows whether this Andromeda Nebula belongs to our own galaxy or it's a different galaxy at that time. So, but what he did was he used his newly built 100-inch telescope. So, he had this very newly built telescope at that time. This is a 100-inch telescope, and this was the largest telescope in 1920s, right? By that time, and this is, I guess, if you go there, you can still see this telescope in the Mount region in Southern California in USA. And he used this telescope, and he photographed the Andromeda Nebula, and he has detected several Cepheid stars within that. Now, Once you have the Cepheid stars, you can go back to the previous slide. You just use this information right here. Once you have the Cepheid stars, you can directly decide the distance to these stars. And what he found was these stars are roughly 1 million light years away from us. Now, modern estimates indicates it is even further away. Now we have very modern methods of estimating distances, which are more accurate, which tells us this particular Andromeda Nebula is even more than 1 million light years away from us. And this clearly tells us that Kersey was correct. Remember, he is the one who mentioned that this Andromeda Nebula is a different or not belongs to the our own galaxy. It's a different galaxy. So that's what he was mentioning, and his idea is correct, right? And remember, the interesting thing is how the science is involved in solving this particular problem, right? So they completely solve this problem by finding the Cepheid stars, and then by discover about this period luminosity relation and apply it to this problem, right? So this is a very nice and classic example of how science contributing to resolve problems, right? Even in astronomy, right? Now we know that the universe contains billions of galaxies. That was the first time that people actually were debating about whether we have only one galaxy or whether there are other galaxies, and they clearly identified that Andromeda is a different galaxy, right? But if I come to the current situation now, we now know that the universe contains many billions of galaxies, right? Which the Milky Way is but one. So Milky Way is just one of these galaxies. We have billions of galaxies now, like stars. Each galaxy contains millions or billions of stars, right? So one particular galaxy will have billions of stars, and we will have billions of galaxies. So think about that in that way. And inside the galaxies, what we will have is interstellar matter, which we talked before, and dark matter. And this dark matter is very important in galaxies. And at the end of, towards the end of this lecture, we will talk about evidences of this dark matter and those kind of stuff. But for the time being, let's just take my word that galaxies contain interstellar matter and dark matter. And I will show you at the end of, towards the end of this lecture, why we tell that there are dark matter inside galaxies and what are these dark matter, right? Now, as you probably can estimate, think about this, galaxy is held together by mutual gravitational attractions of its stars and other matter. So galaxies are basically held together because of the gravity, basically, right? And then the galaxies are usually separated from each other by vast regions of mostly empty space. Now, these galaxies, if you take two different galaxies, they are separated by from each other by a vast region, right? So in between those galaxies, most of the time you can see the empty space. And galaxies also called as island universes because of due to this reason, right? Now let's look at the right now. Let's go back to the talking about the Milky Way. Now there are people who tried to make maps of Milky Way in ancient time. Now, in the year of 1785, one of the English astronomer called William Herschel, so he constructed the first 3D map of the Milky Way. But the problem is, if you need to find the need to make a map of the Milky Way, you need to find the distances of the stars, right, that you see. But what he did was he assumed that all the stars have same intrinsic brightness. So which means he basically neglected the distances, and he assumed that all of these stars will have the same absolute magnitude. by measuring the apparent magnitude of each star, he was then able to make a rough estimate of its distance. So he just measured the apparent magnitude and then estimated the distance. Now you know that this is not correct, right? Because all the stars are not in the same distance now. Right. Sorry, so what he did was he just made the apparent magnitude and then estimate the distance, right? And then this allowed him to make a three-dimensional map of the stars that are in the Milky Way, which looked like this. And now we know that this is nowhere near what we know today, right? But at that time, this was the map that we had for the Milky Way, right? Now the problem with this Herschel's map was he found that the Milky Way has a flattened disk-like shape, and this is his idea about the Milky Way. And in addition, he concluded that the sun lies at the near or the center, right? So what he thought is sun is probably at the center or very close to the center of the Milky Way. Now we know that this is wrong, right? So sun is not at the center. Sun and our whole solar system is one of the arms, is situated in one of these arms of the Milky Way. So Milky Way is the spiral galaxy. The most important thing was that astronomers did not realize how important the extinction is that time. Anybody knows what extinction means? Actually, extinction is one of the very one of the challenging issues that we have in observational astronomy. The extinction means that interstellar matter dims starlight as it passes through. Distant stars are more obscured than nearby stars. Most of the distant stars may be completely invisible. So what happens is when you look at the galaxies or stars that are very far away, they have traveled through this interstellar matter. So when they meet this matter, the light dims because this light maybe get absorbed or scattered by this matter. So what will happen is when we observe a star from here and measure the brightness, that is not actually the true brightness of that star. Most of the brightness may be lost due to this extinction effect, right? So which means if you are doing a real research in astronomy, you need to make sure that you take this extinction factor into account, especially if you are looking at galaxies that are like galaxies or different galaxies in other if you are looking at different galaxies, not the Milky Way. Even in the Milky Way, this extinction effect matters because there is a lot of interstellar matter in between stars. Now this means that one tends to see the same number of stars in any direction within the disk of the Milky Way. This is why the sun appears to be at the center. Now this is what has happened to this very first Herschel's map, because most of the stars that are far away is invisible. The reason is these stars, the light coming from these stars are completely maybe absorbed by the interstellar matter, so that you won't see those. So what happens is if you look at every direction, you will see same stars, right? Basically the same number of stars. So that's what has happened. And this is basically a problem that comes with the extinction. Now, if you do a real research, you used to do something called extinction corrections, that you used to calculate it differently and add some value to the brightness of the stars so that you correct for the extinction by estimating it. Right. And then the next attempt to make the map of the Milky Way is using another set of variable stars called RR Lyras. And in order to make more realistic map of the Milky Way, so there was an improved technique that have used to estimate the distances, and that was using RR Lyra stars. These stars are very regular in brightness, which means they are again another type of variable stars, so pulsating. So what has happened was their period of variations are typically from half a day to a day in length. So their period is very fast, so they will fastly increase their brightness and dims again. Their period is fast, which means the T value will be very small. And all these RR Lyras have approximately the same average intrinsic brightness. This is what is important here. So their intrinsic brightness is roughly the same. They are about 100 times more luminous than the sun. So which means you already know the intrinsic brightness, right? So they are 100 times luminous than the sun, which means their fixed absolute magnitude makes them ideal for estimating the distance. So once you know this fact about that they are 100 times more luminous than the sun, which means you already know the luminosity of that, right? So that you can find the absolute magnitude. And basically the absolute magnitude will be roughly the same value. And that will help to estimate the distances. And here is from the graph, and this graph is taken from the book that I asked you to refer from the OpenStack. And here are the Cepheid variables. Right here you have this the set of Cepheid variables that you can see the period luminosity relation, and these RR Lyra stars are right here. So their period is roughly varying from 0.3 to probably close to 1 days. And you can see that they are clusters in this particular region, clustered, which means they roughly have the same luminosity, which makes it easier to find the absolute magnitude. And the idea is you will have roughly the same absolute magnitude for all the stars, right? Now these RR Lyras are most commonly found in globular clusters. Now I would expect that you will remember what a globular cluster is. Remember that we talked about two types of star clusters. The one type is called open clusters, which are roughly young clusters. And one classic example is our own cluster called Pleiades star cluster. And the other one is called globular cluster. Globular clusters are relatively older clusters, which means you have older stars in globular clusters. And these RR Lyra stars are found in these globular clusters. Now in 1970, Shapley identified RR Lyras in 93 globular clusters. Now the advantage is once you found RR Lyras, that will allow you to measure the distances to these clusters. And remember, these are star clusters, right? Not galaxy clusters. What he found is that these clusters were distributed in a roughly spherical manner throughout the Milky Way. So these clusters, he found RR Lyra stars in these clusters, which helped him to find the distances. And once he found the distances, he concluded that these are distributed in spherical manner throughout the Milky Way. And his estimate was that the Milky Way was about 100,000 light years in diameter, right? So it's the Milky Way's diameter. And what he also found was that the sun is not at the center. So we also know that now, right? Sun is not at the center. And instead he estimated that the sun was about 25,000 light years from the center of the Milky Way, right? So these are the estimates that he got using RR Lyra stars, in fact 93 of them inside these globular clusters in the Milky Way, right? Now this is roughly what he thought, or how he thought about the Milky Way. And this is that spherical shape, and you have this disk at the center, those kind of stuff, right? Now if you think about the shape of the Milky Way, roughly the Milky Way has three main components, three distinct components in fact. The one is a galactic disk, which is large and flattened in shape with the built-in spiral pattern of stars and interstellar matter. That is called as the disk. And most of the Milky Way's young stars and star-forming regions and interstellar matter are found here. Now, this is also very typical to most of the spiral galaxies. If you look at spiral galaxies, they have a lot of star-forming regions in spiral arms. And actually, I don't have time to explain that, but there are research that I have done myself using some H-alpha filters, which very clearly show that there are bright light coming under the H-alpha region from the spiral arms of these spiral galaxies, which clearly shows that there are a lot of active star formation or young stars in these spiral arms of the galaxies, right? Now that you probably have a question that why we look at H-alpha and relate it to the spiral star formation, that comes from that. Remember that I told you that if you have a lot of star forming regions, they emit ultraviolet radiation, which can probably, what do you call this, the excite this molecular hydrogen. So as a result of this process, when the de-excite, they actually sorry, excuse me, emit these H-alpha lines so that we can detect those and relate it to the star formation. That's actually one way of measuring star formation, right? So that's a different story. But then you have a galactic bulge, which is relatively small and spherical in shape. And this is a dense region which contains many types of stars and interstellar matter. And then the third part is you have the galactic halo. This is very large and spherical. And halo is made up of relatively old stars and clusters and very little interstellar matter. Now, if you look at a picture, which will give you a good idea about the structure of our Milky Way. This is where you have the bulge, and you can see that they have named, and then you have the disk and the halo, right? This also divided into two parts, the thin disk and the thick disk. However, this pink region right here is the disk of the galaxy. And then you have this blue circle right here close to the center, that is the bulge of the galaxy. And this large spherical shape that you can see here is the halo of the galaxy, right? Right. Now there are some more information about our own galaxy and some of the dynamics of the galaxy, how the stars are moving here and there. And then the Sagittarius A, which is what we thought as the supermassive black hole that we have at the center of our galaxy. And then different looks that we have for our central region of the galaxy using different wavelength regions. Now, for example, this is a near infrared view of the galactic center. And then how to find the mass of the Milky Way, which is a nice example for you. And then some other information about something called galaxy rotation curve. This is what leads to the dark matter. And then something called mass to light ratio, and what is dark matter. And then I will move on to different types of galaxies and probably Hubble classification of the galaxies, irregular spirals, and this is called Hubble tuning fork diagram. So I'm just going ahead to show you what kind of things that I would like to talk next time, and then I will move on to the local group and then the galaxy clusters. And this is in fact Abell 426 galaxy cluster, which actually in these sections I'm going to use some of my own data as well, as I used to work mostly in this field of galaxy clusters. And this is one of those rich galaxy clusters that I took this image from one of the larger telescopes in Kittwick National Observatory. So if time permits, I would may give some information about those as well. But next time, I will start from here. talking about some of the properties of the Milky Way, and then how we classify these galaxies and different properties of galaxies, and then we move on to galaxy clusters. Right. So do you have any questions up to here?